Oh, hello, YouTube. This is Largo 64. Some time ago, actually several years ago, I wrote a snippet which was going to go into a book, which I've been way too lazy to actually write. But I would like to share this one chapter with you. Um, it's called "People We Are Taught to Admire." There are many people in the Bible whom we have been taught to admire, not because they had admirable characters, for certainly they did not because they were men of great accomplishment, not because they discovered the nature of the earth and the living creatures on it. Of these things they knew virtually nothing. No, they were to be admired because they were obedient, and because they begat many offspring who would presumably also be obedient. They were, to put it succinctly, God's breeding stock. Nowhere in the Bible is a patriarch praised for his intelligence, his powers of observation, his scientific curiosity, his kindness to his animals, neighbors, wives, or children, probably in that order, or for his invention of anything to make life less difficult for all people. The purveyors of religion wish us to admire these men because they performed as fighting champions, slaughtering neighboring tribes, except for the virgin females. Guess what they were spared for? Among other admirable traits were lying, either to save themselves or procure advantage, scheming how to steal power and wealth, or rutting like goats so as to replace all those lost in their rapacious adventures. Lot is the man I'm going to talk about now. Lot with his family was the only man living in Sodom who was righteous. Lot invited two angels to stay with him in his house overnight. The men of Sodom surrounded the house and demanded that the men be sent out to them so that we may know them. I don't think they wanted to just get acquainted. Lot, who knew how to make a guest feel at home, offered to send his two daughters out to the crowd instead, and told the Sodomites to do whatever they wanted with them, rather than molest his guests. This righteous man, instead of protecting his daughters as a father ought to do, proposed to send them out to be violated in order to protect two perfect strangers. Since he referred to these strangers as men, it isn't clear whether he knew they were angels and needed no protection. When they jerked him back into his house and struck the Sodomites blind, it should have been more or less obvious that they were not ordinary men. Nevertheless, a godly man might have been expected to ask God for protection for himself and his family and guests. Why didn't Lot? The Bible doesn't say. The book also doesn't say where Mrs. Lot was while all this angel visiting and daughter ravishing was going on. It isn't recorded that she made any protest against this travesty. She wasn't a pillar of salt yet, and as she remained silent while her daughters were to be thrown to the Sodomites, she wasn't even a pillar of the community. When subsequently she was turned into a pillar of salt, Lot seems to have taken no notice. This was one loving family. After Lot was warned by the angels that Sodom was about to be destroyed, Lot didn't look to God for miraculous protection for his home and family. He relied instead on the age-old tactic of escaping into the desert. But not too far into the desert. The hills the angels had told him to go to were too far off for him, so he asked them to spare a little, the Bible calls it nameless, and then names it, town, which was called Zoar because it was small. It isn't clear whether it was called Zoar, meaning little, already, or was named that by the angels or by Lot. At any rate, the people of this town apparently didn't like being reminded of how little it was. Lot was afraid to stay there very long, so he went to the hills after all and lived in a cave. Later, this caveman had sex with each of his daughters in turn. Now, the Bible says that the daughters conspired to get him drunk so they could preserve his seed. But as anyone familiar with the effects of alcohol knows, If Lot were drunk enough not to recognize his own daughters, he was too drunk to perform an act of sexual intercourse. The inescapable conclusion is that Lot was guilty of knowing incest. Lot was a cold man, showing no respect or concern for either his wife or his daughters. That was not out of character for his time, of course. Women had a status perhaps not above cattle and goats. He was able to stay in favor with God not because he was good, decent, loving, and kind, but because he acknowledged God, showed the proper respect, and made adequate sacrifices. He was so utterly selfish that when his wife was killed and there were no unrelated women around to satisfy his carnal desires, he had incest with his own daughters and then blamed them for getting him drunk. This was the one righteous man God chose to spare. An omniscient God would have known in advance that Lot would behave in this way, and a wise God would have incinerated him along with the rest of those wicked people. I say wicked people, although I have trouble imagining that even sodomite babies were capable of much wickedness. But God seems to have no compunction about murdering babies. In fact, he says in stone, the tablets, that he visits the sins of the fathers upon the children unto the third and fourth generation. To recapitulate, we have in Lot a man who in our day would be seen as pimping his own daughters, neglecting his family, sexually molesting his daughters, and then blaming them for it. What a man.